All right, Heath, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, model citizens. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Heath Hurwitz, and today I'm going to present my take on John Allen's Timesaver switching puzzle and why I decided to do something a little bit different with it. This project ultimately did not accomplish the goals that I had set out, but it did change my perspective regarding model railroading. By day, I'm a senior project manager working for an LED display manufacturer in the audiovisual and construction fields. While it does involve a lot of problem solving, sometimes very technical, it definitely does not offer the diversity of skills possible in model railroading. When the pandemic started just over 3 years ago, I was working in the live events industry, and hence I ended up with a lot of free time on my hands. I decided that I needed to learn a new skill. I started spending a lot of time learning about online events and how to build communities through the internet. It was through this exploration that I found a community of model railroaders on YouTube. I was reminded just how much I loved model railroading, and I really got back into it. Spare time and model railroading are a great combination. I set a goal to combine my skills in audiovisuals to expand the online community around model railroading. For me, model railroading is all about troubleshooting, and it involves every category of STEAM: science, technology, engineering, art, and math. Model railroading allows me to feed my creativity as well as my passion for electricity and electronics. My experience with model railroading up until 2020 was rail fanning layouts. As a kid, I went to the Greenberg train shows in my area and saw a lot of trains running in loops. It was my experience at the time that all layouts were built for continuous running, and that turnouts were only used to get trains in and out of the storage yards or for scenic elements. As I got more and more into model railroading as an adult, I had my heart set on a layout that was built around continuous running. But I kept hearing about how exciting operations were, but I didn't really understand what it was and why I would want to do it. Living in New York City, I did have limited space, but I wanted to try out this switching thing that I kept hearing about. When trying to decide what I wanted to build, I wanted something complicated, but not too complicated. I tend to err on the side of complicated, which you'll get a sense of as I discuss the build that I did complete. And although I was not initially thinking about remote operations, I wanted something that I could learn about all the various electronics available in the hobby. DCC was new to me, and I wanted to experience its possibilities. When I started researching options, the Inglenook sidings came up a lot. And I found this great website that had a good write-up of several different shelf switching puzzles. At this point, I realized that I would be building a puzzle and not an actual layout. But the Inglenook sidings with 2 turnouts wasn't quite complicated enough for me. Another option that I found online was the Switchman's Nightmare by Lynn Westcott. This puzzle had a lot of promise as I saw some really interesting examples where modelers had turned the puzzle into scenic masterpieces. But with 10 turnouts, this was a little more complicated than I wanted to tackle. And this brought me to the Timesaver by John Allen. And as stated by Goldilocks in The Three Bears, this one is just right. This Timesaver with 5 turnouts was a good middle ground. Also, when considering adding in all the technology, the smaller layout would also be less expensive. This was another consideration for me choosing the Timesaver over the Switchman's Nightmare. For my variation, I added a 6th turnout. The additional spur you can see in the picture on the bottom. This is where I put my DCC programming track, as well as just providing another option to spot cars. I currently have 5 delayed uncoupling magnets on my version, while the original only had 4. I decided to build this Timesaver in N scale. I'd already owned all of the track as I had purchased it when considering other layout options. I originally used Atlas Code 80 snap track and turnouts. The benchwork is just a 48-inch by 10-inch shelf that I picked up at the local hardware store. I covered the shelf with 1/2-inch cork so that I could use track nails to secure the track. I did not glue anything down in case I had to change something. And I actually wound up laying the track twice, so it was a good thing I didn't glue anything down. In order to provide more reliable operations, I ended up swapping out the Atlas turnouts that had insulated frogs for Pico electrofrogs. The Atlas number 4 turnouts are 12.5 degrees and the Pico medium turnouts are 10 degrees. So due to this 2.5 degree difference, I had to relay all of the track. This solved the issue I was having with my 4-axle switchers and the isolated frogs in the Atlas turnouts. Being able to power the frogs was much easier than adding keep alives to my N-scale switchers. Atlas Code 80 track is compatible with either Pico Code 80 or Code 55, so the track heights aligned without any issues. I used the Pico joiners instead of the Atlas joiners because they're a lot smaller, and I like that smaller profile. The showstopper and the move to increased online communities had a huge influence on my model railroading and the choices that I made when building the switching puzzle. I was able to connect with a lot of different people and borrow some of their ideas and methodologies when building my puzzle. But we all had different goals for remote operations, which required different technology. A huge influence in my decision to make a puzzle for remote operations was Bernard Beck, and seeing him being interviewed on the TSG Multimedia YouTube channel. He did a lot of the initial work at Silicon Valley Lines in implementing remote operations. Silicon Valley Lines is dedicated to operating our models in a realistic fashion, and their remote operations followed that mission. They use Discord voice chat, where remote engineers could ask a remote dispatcher permission to proceed to a specific block. The dispatcher would confirm the route is clear and adjust the turnouts as needed and release the train to proceed. There were local yard masters that would help out the remote crews as needed. SVL had accomplished a lot, and all they had was a very limited DSL internet connection. Another inspiring remotely controlled layout is Dave Avely's Onondaga cutoff. I'm also aware of several other layouts that have remote operations set up, such as Speed Mueller down in Texas, Brad Anderson in Australia, Andy Ambrose in the UK. There are a lot of people experimenting with remote operations, but there's not a single universal system or methodology that everybody was following. My goal is to create a puzzle that could be remotely operated and easily accessible. While I was able to take guidance from some of those that had ventured into the realm of remote operations, there were still several challenges that I had to overcome myself. One of my goals with remote operations is that I wanted the remote operator to be able to solve the puzzle without requiring any local input, so 100% remotely controlled. A lot of the solution came down to technology, but I was not sure what would give the remote operator the best experience. Accessibility and ease of use were very important considerations. As I was building everything to be remotely operated, I did incorporate microtrains delayed uncoupling magnets. I used a Dremel with a router attachment to recess the delayed uncoupling magnets into the tracks. I ended up painting the locations of the magnets with the goal to be more visible over a camera. I also needed a way to have all of the turnouts be remotely thrown, so I went with some slow motion switch machines. I chose to use Smails from Circuitron as they have built-in DCC decoders, and they also have other electrical contacts that I could use for powering frogs and LED indicators. While the main intention is for the turnouts to be controlled remotely, I did wire up push buttons so that I could have local control. These are also wired directly to the Smails built-in connections for the buttons. I added door signals next to each turnout so that I could indicate the turnout's current position. Green was straight and red indicated that the switch was thrown. The signals are facing perpendicular to the track so that they're easily visible from the operator's position, the camera. To control the state of the door signals, I wired up the LEDs to one of the SPDT connections on the turnout motors. There's a lot of wiring just for the turnouts, but I tried to keep it as neat as possible for easy troubleshooting. I also ended up isolating each section of the track with the idea that I could add block detection in the future. The block detection is actually working using a DigiKeys DR4088 LNCS, although I don't actually have the notifications set up in JMRI, so at this point the remote operator can't actually use that information. The next two slides are for the people that like the technical details. The heart of the DCC system is the DigiKeys DR5000 command station. I have a UR93 to connect wirelessly to my Digitrax throttles. The TCS Wi-Fi throttles connect via the Y-throttle server that I'm running on JMRI, and the protothrottle receiver in the center there is connected via ExpressNet. This command station is running the switching puzzle as well as the layout expansion. I'm using a DCC Concepts alpha meter to monitor the power, and I have DCC Specialties PSX1 digital circuit breakers with buzzers installed for additional short protection. The majority of all of the technology that I included in this layout was intended for me to learn about DCC, while others of it are specifically for the remote operations. One of the requirements for remote switching a yard or a puzzle is going to be a low latency connection between the remote operator and the model railroad. This was probably one of the biggest things that I needed to solve. I had to figure out, how can somebody remotely see well enough to couple and uncouple N-scale boxcars? How many cameras would I need? Where should the cameras be placed? How can they see the magnets and the ends of the turnouts to make sure that the points were cleared? The difference between the photo on the left and the photo on the right is very subtle in N-scale. And I had to come up with a reliable way for a remote operator to be able to see the difference. And not only see the difference, but also be able to control the locomotive with enough precision to achieve the coupling and uncoupling without immense frustration. With the goal to enable the remote operator to couple and uncouple the cars, I ended up not being able to use services like Skype, Zoom, or Teams because they have some built-in latency. By the time the video goes up to the cloud and comes back down to the remote operator, there's enough of a delay that they wouldn't have accurate control of the locomotives. I ended up using a peer-to-peer video connection service called Video Ninja. The camera that I'm using is a GoPro Hero 9. It's connected via HDMI capture card to the same computer that's also running JMRI. Using the HDMI connection is giving me a high-quality, low-latency video connection to the camera. And I also found out that the GoPros were the only cameras that had a wide enough view, but was also not distorted to the point where you couldn't see what you were doing. For the backbone of the remote operations, I chose JMRI. Other people were using JMRI for remote operations, and I figured the cost of the software was just about right for what I was trying to do. I have this software running on a separate dedicated 2018 MacBook Pro. Through the use of the built-in JMRI web server, an operator is able to remotely access the locomotive throttle and the turnout control panel. I added a member of the railroad crew to stand next to the uncoupling magnets to help the remote engineer see where the center of the magnets were located. I chose to use the Great Northern boxcars because I'm really into circus trains, and they call this set the Great Northern Boxcars, the circus cars. In 1956, the Great Northern painted up 10 40-foot boxcars in experimental paint schemes and sent them around the GN system for employee input. Some of the paint schemes were so incredibly loud and garish, thus they earned the moniker the circus cars. In addition to the different colors of the boxcars, I also added large numbers from a label maker onto the top of the cars that would match the reporting marks. This made the cars easier to identify in the camera by referencing both their color and their number. I've since added the reporting marks and number to the top of every boxcar on my layout, as even locally, it is very hard to read the numbers on the sides of the rolling stock in N-scale. The boxcars were all pre-1996 microtrains, so they all received new trucks and couplers and metal wheel sets. I also added weight to the boxcars right over the trucks to bring them up to approximately 1.1 ounces. These changes improve the uncoupling and coupling of the cars. I'm currently using an N-Scale Atlas Alco S2 with ESU decoders as the switcher of choice for my layout. There's a lavalier microphone directly above the switching layout to better capture the sounds for the locomotives. You could also hear the sounds of the switch motors when you throw them remotely. Now that we've gone through the background and the basics of my construction, the question really is, how can you remotely operate this layout? A goal of mine was to make this puzzle easily accessible for everyone, which for me meant that I didn't want the remote operators to have to download any specific software or go through any complicated process to be able to run the railroad. Everything is set up to be accessed through a web browser. While everything is web-based, it does require the end user to enter a password for access. I changed the password as needed to ensure only 1 or 2 max people are accessing the controls at the same time. The limit is required to keep the camera latency to a minimum. For every person that is added, it delays the camera a couple frames each time, and it makes it more difficult for the remote operator. You can contact me if you want to operate the Timesaver. We can coordinate a time, and I would just send you a password and send you the link to get to this page. For the best results, I'm recommending that people use a Chromium-based browser, such as Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, or Opera. The web page that I built is optimized for a resolution of 1920 by 1080 or higher. Step 2 is, how do we enable the camera view? Due to security features of web browsers, I couldn't have the live video automatically load. It should be pretty clear on the web page from this image where you would click in order to see the video. When you click here, this is what the screen looks like, and you get a live picture of the switching layout. I'll also provide you with what the name and number of the locomotive is that's currently on the Timesaver. I've got the roster group set up in JMRI so that I could filter the list of locomotives for the users that you see down on the bottom left. The way you select the locomotive is essentially you just click on the one that you want, and it will open up a throttle page. And the throttle page looks like this. When I initially did this, I had minimal functions turned on. At this point, if you access the railroad, they are all turned on. So you can hear all the sounds and press all the buttons like you would as if you were actually at the layout. To turn on the track power, you press and hold the O in the top left corner of this window. You need to press and hold it for 2 seconds. It's red when it's off, and then when you press it and the layout turns on, it will turn green. On the right is the throttle, and the carets on the left side are for forward and reverse to control the locomotives. It's also possible to use a Wi-Fi enabled throttle. You can do this remotely to control the layout. For example, you can use either Y-throttle or engine driver on an iPhone or an Android device, or you could use a TCS UWT50 or 100. And this, I think, would be a good option for people that might want to operate the Timesaver as a team with both an engineer and a conductor. So the last step is for the remote operator to confirm that all of the turnouts match the indicators in JMRI. Right now, there is not any feedback set up on the turnouts, so the best course of action is to activate all the turnouts to ensure they are in the correct positions. The turnout panel on the bottom right here, you can see the 6 turnouts. Right now, 5 of them are diverging and 1 of them is straight. You would just click the round buttons. I recommend you click them twice just to make sure they are all in the same orientation. The turnout panel also identifies all of the potential car spots on the layout. Mainline left is abbreviated as ML. Tracks 1 through 4 are just T1 through T4, and the runaround is labeled RA. All of these are potential locations related to the gamification of the switching puzzle. Another problem to solve was creating these challenges for somebody that is remote to operate the layout. What I eventually decided on was a randomly generated list, which is based on the challenge level you pick. So this will provide you with track locations and the boxcars that need to be spotted in those appropriate locations. The challenge in the overall screen there is located in the top right. Just like the throttle and turnout panels, the challenge is hosted on my server. So should there be multiple operators, it'll all be the same for all of the various operators. The challenge provides you a randomized solution that you can play if you so choose. This is essentially your work order where you need to spot the various boxcars. Based on the number of boxcars on the puzzle, the length of the spurs, and the difficulty level chosen, it can increase or decrease the difficulty level. I typically leave 1 switcher and 7 boxcars on the layout. There are 4 levels that you can choose from: Apprentice, Journeyman, Expert, and Master. The different options will provide a different quantity of boxcars that you need to spot. So the Apprentice level in the top left provides 2 boxcars. Journeyman, shown in the bottom left, is 4. Expert is 6, and Master would be 7. For the Apprentice level, there would still be all 7 boxcars on the puzzle, but to complete the challenge, you would only need to spot the 2 specific boxcars that are called out. This program was actually custom written by another model railroad YouTuber named Joey from Late Night Model Railroad. This now gives you all the elements: the camera, the throttle, the turnout panel, and the challenge, all on a single web page. While the puzzle is for the remote operator, I've also set up a way that we can share the playing of the game with everyone. This is the view that I can send to YouTube so that as many people that want to watch are able to watch without impacting the latency of the system for the remote operator. As I mentioned earlier, the more people that log in to be able to operate it, the more it slows down the system. So this way I can send a single feed up to YouTube that as many people that want to watch it can. At this point in the Timesaver build, it is 100% operational, and I had started promoting it. As of today, on my small YouTube channel, my most popular video of all time is one of the videos that is the building of this Timesaver puzzle for remote operations. But the puzzle never took off. So I never really met my goals of sharing my excitement for model railroading operations with other people. I wouldn't consider the project a failure. I believe this hobby is all about trying new things, problem solving, and having a good time. It's about learning new things and not being afraid to break things. So what went wrong? I think first and foremost, I should have listened to Byron. I'm kind of joking a little bit when I say this, but in the OpSig compendium, Byron did talk about his hatred for switching puzzles. He also has an article on his website about why he dislikes them and why he specifically dislikes the Timesaver. And I do think in looking back that part of the issues with getting people excited about it was the choice that I made to use the Timesaver as my puzzle. Another issue was the choice of scale. N scale is very difficult to couple and uncouple cars for operations, even if you are local. So trying to do it 100% remotely, only using uncoupling magnets, caused a lot of frustration for the operators. So the people that did use it and that were interested in it, at a certain point just got frustrated with how difficult the coupling and uncoupling was in N scale. Another piece of the feedback that I heard frequently was that people were afraid of breaking something. And I did understand this concern. I had a lot of safety measures set up to prevent anyone from being able to damage anything. I mean, you couldn't run anything off the layout. If you did run a switch, with the circuit breakers and everything, you weren't really going to break anything, but this was a comment that I heard over and over again. I tried to tell people that if something did get broken, in my opinion, it was worth the risk and the opportunity of sharing this with other people. Also, the initial launch wasn't very easily accessible. This is what it looked like initially. This was the initial web page version. You had to open up each of the windows separately. And there were some website security issues that I was running into that I needed to overcome in order to keep the access secure, but also make it easy to access. And ultimately, it took me about 6 months or so to solve this, which was a lot longer than I expected. And all of the initial interest that I had built up in the layout had dwindled at that point. And the last, and I think the biggest one that I've sort of identified, is that people went back to hosting operating sessions and doing other activities. This was Island Ops, which was held, I'm going to forget what month it was held in, but it was held a couple months ago here in my local area. Fantastic event, but now that we were all able to get out and about and actually operate on other people's layouts, remote operations where people were actually driving the locomotives and doing the switching, I have found to be on the decline. The one thing that I have seen that has come out of all of this, though, that is very positive is the ability to have remote dispatchers. And I do think that that is something that's becoming more and more popular for various layouts. I did learn a lot on this project, and it has completely changed my mindset towards model railroading. So what's next? I am currently working on a design for an N-scale point-to-point switching layout. My original thought, as I mentioned earlier in this, was that I had to have a continuous loop. And by building the Timesaver and learning about switching and understanding a little bit more about operations, I was able to let go of that need, which enabled me to come up with what I think is turning out to be a better layout for what my goals are. The layout that I'm basing everything off of is based on the last remaining transfer bridge on Manhattan. And there's now a park along the waterfront that gives tribute to the railroading that actually used to fill this area. The name of the layout is based on Riverside Park, which is the top right photo, and the 69th Street transfer bridge, which is the bottom photo. The original layout design included the Timesaver because I thought it would be a good idea to be able to bring in a third operator remotely. There's a staging yard, 2 industrial areas, a main yard, a car float in a small town, and I kind of stuck this all in 22 linear feet of shelf layout, but this ended up being another false start of mine on my operations journey. This doesn't accomplish my goals. The trains can run, but it's not a desirable operations experience. So I am actually going to be tearing this layout out very shortly and starting over again. The new design actually has the same exact operational elements as before, except I've now spread them out to cover a lot more space in the room, which gives the operators and the layout a lot more space to breathe and a lot more chance to be enjoyable. I am still working on this design, but I hope to start building it in the fall. My thought is that I will likely have 2 or 3 local operators, but I will be utilizing a remote dispatcher due to my space constraints. The layout will also likely be able to be remotely controlled because I do plan on having JMRI hooked up, but the main intention of the layout will not be remote operations like I did for the Timesaver. When I started back into model railroading in 2019, I didn't imagine that I would ever kind of get to this point of having my own model railroad empire. I'm still looking towards the 69th Street transfer bridge. This is a view of it actually from the other side. There is a pier that still exists that was one of the original piers back when there were, I think it was 5 car floats or 5 areas where rail cars could be loaded and unloaded in this area. Also in this area at the time, in that bottom right corner, you could see was the West Side 60th Street yard. So this is where a lot of my inspiration for what I am doing comes from. My new goals are a lot more clear, and the story of my railroad is a lot more detailed. The story of my railroad empire starts with the purchase of the Human City Junction leasing company. So Human City Junction is the name of my YouTube channel, and I've created this Railroad of Lies, HCJX, based off of that name. I'm kind of basing this in the late 60s, early 70s, when the New York Central was ending all of its freight service. So my leasing company was buying up any of their, older box cars and the trackage and the branch line along the west side, as well as the car floats in the area. The Human City Junction Leasing Company started another company called the Riverside Transfer, which is the name of the layout. And that company is what eventually took over the all of the car floats on the west side from the New York Central. So it's all fictitious, but I am using a lot of different prototypical sites throughout New York City to influence my layout design. My design is not prototypical, but I am taking the ideas and some of the historical influences to build something new. I do have a presentation that I built for the new layout that I have shared over on the LDSig groups.io. And I've been getting some really fantastic feedback on changes to make it a really good operations-based layout, because that's ultimately my goal at this point. Continue to share the hobby, build something that people are going to want to come over and operate on my layout. Building the Timesaver variation really opened up my eyes to a much bigger world of model railroading that I was completely unaware of. And while it didn't meet my expectations, it was a really good project that grew my interest in the hobbies. If you want more information on what I'm up to, I primarily post on YouTube, but I can also be found on other social media platforms as well. My website is humancity.org, which has links to all of the different information. If you want to see the new layout design that I'm working on, if you click on the one that says Riverside, transfer my N scale point-to-point layout, I've actually uploaded the presentation there so that you can take a look at it. And I'm going to end my presentation with a picture of the train inspector who is taking a much needed break after this pretty complicated project. And it looks like I went through this a little faster than I intended, but it looks like we do have some questions in the chat. So Eric, if we want to get to those now, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, the one question here is, how long is a typical session and what is your role during a session? Assuming you're the boots on the ground to take care of the tweaking of a remote session, right?
Yeah, so I do set up remote sessions so that I am in this space while the remote session is going on. This space doubles as my work from home office as well as my model railroad empire. So I just work something out where I will be around. I've got a Discord server, and I have a special little channel that I usually will keep open. And if something happens on the layout, I usually will wait until the operator reaches out and just say, hey, I went over the switch the wrong way. Can you, help me out? Or I'm having an issue coupling these cars. Can you help me out?
Well, I'll ask a weird question. Would it be possible to, how much effort is it to set it up? Is it something where we could try it out for a couple of minutes, or is it down right now?
I don't have it all turned on right now.
Okay, that's fine.
So yeah, unfortunately. But to answer your question about how much time it would take, people that have run the expert level, which is to set all 7 cars, takes about an hour.
Okay.
So, apprentice level, much less time because it's only 2 cars, but, somewhere between 15 minutes to an hour.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Most of the questions are just some comments for you. Somebody mentioning that you don't have HTTPS on the site, and the recommendation is don't put credit cards into Heath's train site.
Yeah. So for
there's probably a technical reason for it. I'll let you answer that.
Yeah. So Hack points out a good point. It is actually HTTPS. If you go to my website, it rolls over to SSL. The reason, and I know I'm going to lose some people here, but stick with me. We'll get back to the other questions in a second. What happens is JMRI does not offer their web server up in SSL. So the only way to access the JMRI portion of what I was trying to do was through an insecure connection, a not secured connection.
Yep.
So what I figured out is there's something called a reverse proxy. I have a Synology NAS. I'm running a reverse proxy on the Synology NAS. Through testing, I found out that it doesn't add enough latency to it to be an issue. So the throttle and the turnout panel are both running through a reverse proxy so that I can embed all 4 of the elements into a single secure web page to access it. Now, that said, somebody like Hack could go in there and view source and find the direct links and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I talked to Steve Todd about it, and I said, we were talking about that JMRI doesn't have a remote secure option. And Steve said, I've had my Raspberry Pi set up open to the internet with the IP address public for many years, and I haven't had any issues.
Yeah, it's just not an interesting target. I mean,
I'm running it on a Mac for one, which, helps limit things a little bit. The computer is isolated from the rest of the network. It is on a DMZ, so all the port forwarding and everything is locked down to just that computer. Yes, if somebody really wanted to, they could probably figure out a way to get in.
It's secure enough for the purposes. So
exactly, but it was a challenge. It was an issue that I had to overcome. I'm using WordPress, so the website that you go to is WordPress, and they require that everything is SSL and it to be able to embed it in the site.
Right.
So anyway.
There is one request. Can you back up to the slide where you showed your future track plan?
Yeah, and if we have time, I could just open the I could open that presentation as well.
I think this is Travers. Is that the one you were looking for?
Oh, Travers is one of the guys that's been very helpful over on the LD SIG, and he's been trying to help me fix. He's been trying to help me fix this yard, which is a complete mess.
Yeah, that could be frightening.
Yeah, this is in my current version. This is completely it's completely different already.
Got it.
Let's see. I think. Oh, that didn't work. Come on. I'm trying to bring up my AnyRail file of it, but there we go. So yeah, it has been, let's see, where is it? Yard upper level. It has been changed and simplified a lot at this point.
Looks a little bit more user friendly there. For
yeah. What I was trying to do was have my engine house be closer to the yard lead, but the reality is it just doesn't work. So I think there's still work to do on it. I'm a little bit, I think, at the point where I might have to start building stuff to figure out where the problems are going to show up. But, with 2 to 3 operators, like this guy's at Manhattanville, this guy over here is at the freight terminal, and this guy's at the yard, or you've got, this guy up here at this, what I'm calling the High Line, this guy over here at the car float, so there's enough room to move around that I think.
Yeah, as long as you don't click the operator 1 layout on there too, that's going to get a little snug.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends. If it's the average size model railroader, we might have some problems with 6 people in the room.
Be like a square dance. Okay, everybody 1 step to your right.
Exactly. And the door actually swings into the room, and there's nothing I can do to change that. So if you want to change your mind, you actually have to leave, change your mind, and then come back into the space.
There you go. Yeah, that would get a little snug. So
yeah, but yeah, I mean, I do think with 3 people that it's probably I mostly want to run locals. That's the thing that most interests me with operations is locals. And I think with 3 people in the room that there is a lot of fun to be had. When I have run, or when I've personally operated on like Vince Lee's Erie 28, which is just the 28th Street car float, it was so intense for the entire time because there was no opportunity to just kind of let the train run for a second.
Right.
That I found it very exhausting. So I'm trying to find a balance between a good level of switching, as well as the opportunity to be able to just, move full trains around the layout.
There's so Travers, well, let's see, a couple comments. John says, I would think that the yard lead to the main to the left of Inwood.
Yeah, a lot of people have talked about that. Travers, one of them, keeps trying to convince me of that. The main line in the area, in a lot of cases, was double track. The only reason why I haven't joined it is because this upper yard here is 4 inches above this lower yard and staging here. So this track here is going down while this track is going up.
Okay.
I want the yard lead to be flat. I don't necessarily want my yard lead to be on an incline. And to join these, I would have to make my yard lead on an incline. So my all of the switching areas are at a 0% grade. So the main yard, this that I'm calling Manhattanville up here, let's turn on some labels that'll help. Manhattanville is the car float area is completely flat, and even this Highline area is completely flat. The only place that it's on an incline is where there's not a switching area.
Yeah.
Again, trying not to frustrate operators too much.
Yeah. Travers suggested that the engine house needs to be near the arrival departure tracks. Are those the greens?
Yeah, so the idea being is that the train comes in here and pulls onto this arrival track.
Yep.
And then the engine can then, or locomotive can then get out of there on this runaround.
Yeah.
Yes, I would love to figure out a way to get the engine facility closer to the arrival track.
Yeah.
Haven't figured that out yet. The theory being is that if the locomotive gets around that runaround, that they're already on the yard ladder. For a long time, I kept trying to put the turnout here for the engine facility.
Ooh.
But then I just wasn't getting enough separation.
Yeah, because I think, well, I don't know what it is in N scale. I think HO typically I think most of the buildings are set up about at least 2 inches between tracks. If you had like the standard engine house from like Walther's, I think it's 2 or maybe 3 inches. So
yeah, this is the 130 foot. This footprint is the 130 foot Walther's diesel house.
All right. Yeah, I think mine, and again, mine is certainly there's certainly better layouts out there, but I have my engine facility at one end. So you come in the arrival departure towards kind of where your green tracks are. You come down the lead and then back down the ladder and then into the facility. So, I mean, it's, let's see. There was a question about, where is it? Is the double crossover shown a commercial product or something being created? It looks like it's something. So right there, if you move your mouse down, I think it's that, no, to the left there, that whole thing. It looks like those are individual pieces, right?
Yeah, so it's individual Pico components. So it's all Pico code 55 offerings that they make, and then there's some short little pieces of flex track just to get a little bit of extra spacing. This is I see a lot of people talking about like spacing minimums. This is a lot more space between track than I really need for N scale, but I'm partially doing, was a mistake. I'm partially doing that because I'm trying to not have so much track that it just makes things difficult to
Well,
switch.
and you need finger space too. I mean, that's 2 inches in HO is barely enough to get Hoosier size fingers in between 2 tracks. I don't know what typical spacing is on Engage, but
NMRA standards is an inch and like an inch and a 32nd or something for parallel
Yep.
straight tracks, which, I mean, that's boxcar next to boxcar. I
Right,
mean, you're not reading anything on it or anything.
yeah,
So what I
this
do
is a
is,
lot roomier.
yeah, the classification yard, you can see I've got, much bigger spacing, and then the staging tracks are much
Yep.
narrower, but still, still a decent amount of space as well.
All right. Yeah, Rick is saying the same thing about the finger spacing. So
Yeah, and I did have in my presentation, I showed a picture of what I do with the box cars with the I-beam on top with the labels on it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I could put the cars right up against each other, but again, trying to eliminate the frustration factor, trying to leave a little bit of space for some ground cover and
Right.
some elements like that as
Makes
well.
sense. Makes sense. All right. Well, I think that's about it for the questions. So, Heath, thanks so much for presenting. We really appreciate it. And as Heath said, if anybody has interest in operating his Timesaver, go visit his is it humancity.com or .org?
.org.
Humancity.org, and there's his email is in the chat, Heath at humancity.org. So with that, we'll stop the recording.